Hello, my friends, and welcome back. I am very excited for today's guests. Today we have Campbell and Liza Rutherford. Now, I actually met Liza on Facebook, and I was intrigued by some of her comments. And the reason I wanted to have Campbell and Liza on is because Campbell attends Harvard. She's going into her third year of Harvard. And for all of you people who hear all the time that your kids will never go to college if you homeschool, Campbell and Liza are here to prove all those words absolutely wrong. Because, like I said, Campbell is going into her third year at Harvard. Yeah, you heard that correctly. Harvard. So thank you so much, Liza and Campbell, for coming on. A little bit about them. Campbell is a 21-year-old junior at Harvard studying applied mathematics with an application in biology. She was born blind. She is the oldest of two kids. Liza is her mom, and your other child is 15 and is actually also homeschooled. Is that correct?
Yes.
Awesome. And she is sighted. So let's just jump into their story because there's multiple layers here. Number one, what they experienced with blindness in the schools, and that whole mess that they had to deal with getting help and all of those things. The decision to homeschool, and then applying for universities and colleges and all that stuff. So I'm excited for them to share their story. It's exciting, and they've got lots to share about like the application process, and as well as their whole homeschooling journey, because they didn't start homeschooling. So thank you so much for coming on, y'all.
Thank you for having us. We're excited.
Yes, thank you.
So let's start at the beginning, because you didn't start as homeschoolers. So if you just go ahead and jump in and share your story.
So as was stated previously, I was born blind, and so I went to a Montessori school for preschool through kindergarten because it was already kind of set up to be hands-on for me, and that was a great experience. Again, because it was already accessible, and the teacher was great, and I had friends there. It was good. And then I went to public school first through fourth grade, and that's when things started to get a little bit more rocky, or at least when I started noticing it getting a little bit more rocky, because I had what's called a teacher of the visually impaired, or TVI, who comes in and basically handles all of the making sure that classroom materials are accessible to me so that I can access them in braille, or that I can get my braille materials transcribed for the teachers, that kind of thing. Usually a blind student would have that every day. And I had that once a week because the TVI who was servicing our district was serving 28 districts altogether. And so she was running all over the place, and had very limited time. And so then right at the end of my fourth grade year, she got a more stationary position at the Tennessee School for the Blind. And so I was going to have no one helping me, especially in middle school, because I'd had a classroom aide in elementary school, but she couldn't follow me to middle school. And so you're just going to be sitting in the classroom doing nothing, basically, because I wouldn't have any accessible materials. And so the school district wanted to send me to the State School for the Blind. But first of all, it's 4 hours away from home. And so I would be bused there on Sundays and then have to come home on Fridays. And so I would be living away from home basically all the time. That was a big no for us, especially because we have a huge extended family around here. And then also, it wasn't a good fit academically for me. And so Mom basically said, okay, what would you think if we homeschooled until you could hire a teacher of the visually impaired full-time? Because they'd apparently been looking since I was 3 years old, and it didn't look like that was going to happen.
And not super efficient.
Yeah. And so she said, then you could still provide us with braille, and things like that, but you wouldn't have to be providing full-time services. So it wouldn't cost as much. And they said, okay, let's try that. And so we tried that first year, and then it turned into 2, into 4, into the rest of high school. So that's how we got started. Also, I was a bit reluctant at first to be homeschooled because, public school was what I'd known for most of my life at that point. But then the day before the last day of school in 4th grade, my iPod got stolen, and I ended up getting it back. But I was like, I don't think I would mind homeschooling now, actually. So that's how that happened.
Wow. And how are you feeling, Liza, about the thought of having to homeschool? I mean, what were some of your concerns and fears that you had?
I was very overwhelmed at first, but at that time I owned a dance studio, and my work schedule, I went into work at 3:30 p.m. and worked till 9 or 10 p.m. every night. And so I wasn't seeing Campbell except on the weekends, and I would, as she would go to the grandparents when I went to work, and then my husband would pick her up and bring her home and do bedtime and all of that. So it was definitely better for my schedule to homeschool. But I was concerned with how am I going to, I wasn't concerned about homeschooling in general, just homeschooling a braille reader, and worried that I would not be able to facilitate that. And it ended up being a lot easier than actually just doing the homework in the evenings, because she would come home from public school and have 4 hours of homework, and we could do a whole homeschool day in less than that, and she could play and be a kid and read books and go outside and like actually see the sunlight other than her 20-minute recess each day, and so it ended up working, and I would see her all day before I went to work. So that was great. Yeah. And she often says, like, what do you usually say about that 5th grade year?
That was probably one of the best years of my life, honestly, partly just because I was sick all the time in public school, probably because I touched everything and caught everything. So I stayed sick and was pretty miserable most of the time. And at homeschool, or when I was homeschooled, I didn't have to deal with that. I discovered that I loved to read, so I went nuts when it came to books. And then also I hadn't hit puberty yet, so I wasn't having to deal with any of that. And so it was a really good year all around.
Well, and I think you bring up an interesting point. When you have all of this extra time, suddenly you get to really explore what you love, and you discovered, wow, I really like reading.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think I'd always known that I enjoyed reading, but I didn't know how much. I also didn't realize that I think I'd been forced to be an introvert in an extrovert situation for most of my life up to that point. And I was like, oh, I actually feel a lot better and can interact with people a lot better when I have some time to myself. Yeah. So that was really nice as well.
And a quick plug for, I'm sure people are wondering how we got a hold of all these braille books for her to read. But that's not what we did. There are these free libraries, which we did have a lot of braille books, and we have a huge number of those, like 12 by 12 cubes in our house to fit, because that's like the perfect size for braille books. Mm-hmm. But we didn't typically get braille books for leisure reading. We used these free libraries called Bookshare and BARD. They're free for any child who has a print disability, any student, even in college, she still uses them. And it's like Audible or Libby or whatever your library uses, but you just immediate download. You don't have to wait your turn. It's incredible. And she trained her ear to read at like 550 words per minute using those. So she could fly through books. Like at first I tried to keep up and say, okay, so you need to practice braille fluency. So she was reading, like, say, the Boxcar Children. Mm-hmm. And I would go, okay, so you're on book 4 right now. So I'm going to go ahead and order like book 7 in braille. And then by the time it got here, she was like on 14, because she was reading so fast. So I gave up on that little task pretty quick.
What was the name of that website again?
So one is called Bookshare, and that one you primarily get eBooks that you would use a synthetic voice to read, although they have some audiobooks now. Mm-hmm. And then the other one is Braille and Audio Reading Download, or BARD. And that's an app you can get on your phone. You do have to, I think you have to have a letter from either a doctor or a teacher or someone saying that you have a print disability that requires it. But that is primarily audiobooks, and you can also get some electronic Braille books if you want, but I usually use it for audiobooks. So Bookshare and BARD. And then we also use Libby, which anybody can use, where you can check out audiobooks from your local library on your phone.
There's another one called Learning Ally.
Learning Ally. I don't know.
And it's not free. I think it's like $120 a year. But it has textbooks, a lot of textbooks in it. Mm-hmm. So if you're wanting to follow, like, say, a public school scope and sequence, and you want public school textbooks, they have a lot. And I think they actually have a few homeschool curricula in there. Mm-hmm. But we just didn't use it enough. I think we paid for it a couple of years, and we used the other ones more. And I was like, why are we doing that? This is free to do the other ones. So we just kind of let that one fade away. But you do have to have an official diagnosis, and they won't accept just like a parent homeschool teacher letter. You have to have from like a doctor, or, you know, if you have dyslexia, I think even like ADHD is covered. Any kind of disability that affects your ability to pay attention and read to a print book. So it's been a huge advantage having those, and it saved us a ton of money. We did a lot of Guest Hollow and Brave Writer through the years, and both of those are lit based, of course. And so Campbell could just download those books and handle it all herself. And now my other one, she could use audio if she wanted to, but she prefers print books. And so like we just are starting chemistry this week, and I have a stack of books like a foot and a half tall that for her to read in print, and I had to buy all those. And I was like, oh man, I was spoiled for years.
So do you use specific curriculums, and did you, or has it been kind of eclectic, and you're like, some curriculums, but other things we just did ourselves? Like what does that look like for you, and what has that look like for you?
So we had a deal with the public school system that we could get Braille from them, but we learned quickly after the first year. We were driving down the road, and Campbell was reading her science was it science or social studies?
I think it was social studies.
Social studies textbook in the back of my car as I was driving, and she was like, Mom, this book says that East Tennessee is not good for farming. And we were literally driving. I grew up on a farm. We're literally driving through farms, miles and miles of farms. At the time. Are
you in Tennessee?
Yeah, we're in East Tennessee. And so I was like, because I think in whatever grade they study state. There's like one chapter about your state. And so this was what they were talking about. And I was like, oh yeah, that's not really correct. So we decided, and they were so dry and so boring.
I remember trying to read the social studies book, and I was like, Mom, help me.
So quickly we gravitated toward, and I call it loosely Charlotte Mason because I don't like to use ancient texts all the time, which Campbell does like some ancient stuff, but we also like Hunger Games and Divergent and all those books too. So, we just call it lit-based eclectic, I think. And so we did use the public school books for math because that's all we could get in Braille. And the thing about that is the teacher's manual it assumes that you have a teaching degree. So it doesn't teach you. It's not like homeschool curriculum where they work each problem out. It just gives you the answer.
Yeah.
So for me, I'm a choreographer and I count to 8 for a living. That's my math skills. That's about the limit I have. And so it was hard for me to help her with math. So pretty quick, she had to learn to do it independently, which obviously was not a problem because she's an applied math major at Harvard. Yeah. But so she did math. We had a few, like my husband's an engineer, so she had a question she could ask him and he would know. But he travels a lot, so he wasn't home very much. And then I have a friend that teaches algebra, so I would ask him. I would send him a picture of something, be like, "What does this mean?" And just here and there. But like that was a handful of times. And then we had a retired calculus teacher who helped with pre-cal, right?
Mm-hmm.
A little bit. So Campbell could email her and ask questions. And then for AP calculus, she had a tutor who was teaching her to present her work digitally. Because if you think about how you present math to a professor, you handwrite it typically, or it's multiple choice, but how you show your work, you handwrite it. Even at Harvard, the students have iPads and they use an Apple Pencil and they write out their problems. So if you're a blind student and you're writing it in braille with this thing that looks like an old typewriter, it's literally, what year was the Perkins created?
Oh, I don't remember.
It's like the 1930s or something.
Oh my gosh.
It's made out of cast iron and it weighs about 10 pounds. So that's what she types braille math on. So obviously you can't just turn that into a college professor. It took us many, many meetings to convince the school district that she would not be able to just turn that into a professor, or she wouldn't always have a human transcriber with her in college and the workplace, because apparently that's what they assumed, and that she needed to know how to do this on the computer. So we found a teacher that could teach her to do that, and we had to have 10 meetings with the school district to get them to fund those classes.
Yeah, over about 2 years.
It took 2 years to get them to approve it. And they finally did, because it's not cheap. It's like $150 an hour for those lessons. So anyway, she had 1 hour a week with a teacher who was teaching her to present her math digitally with a braille display and a laptop and a screen reader. And that was all the help she had with AP calculus. And then she took the exam, scored very well, and then took Calc 2 and 3 at local community college. And I finally didn't have to get textbooks anymore because they handled it. So that was it. I would literally have to borrow a truck to get her textbooks, because braille textbooks, so say a textbook in math for a sighted kid is maybe 2 inches thick, the normal. For a braille student, it would be like her geometry curriculum was 110 12 by 12 by, say, 1.5 inch volumes.
What?
So it would be like multiple boxes. And they would have them at the school district. And there was the sweetest lady that worked there, Beth. And she would call me and say, Campbell's textbooks are here and they're taking up half my office. So if you wouldn't care to come get them. And so I would have to borrow my dad's truck, go load all of these in his truck and haul them home. And then we would have to, pack the cubes. We had a detached garage that we would keep. We'd keep like 10 volumes in the house. Each volume was maybe a chapter? No, not even a chapter. Maybe
usually a lesson.
A lesson. So she would work through those, and then I would take those out and bring the other 10 in. And so we just had that cycle for a while. So when she took her first dual enrollment class and I didn't have to do that anymore, I was like, hallelujah.
Yeah. And actually a lot of materials are available for free digitally now. And so it makes people's lives a little easier, I think. So like open source textbooks you can find online, and they'll automatically be accessible. The only thing is graphics, like for geometry and other math too. It's hard to get those in an accessible format. So sometimes, at least when you're first learning about them, you do need tactile graphics. But that's all technical stuff. I don't know if your audience needs to know all that. But yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the challenges that you had with the school, because I think one of the things before I pulled the kids, I thought, because I have a couple twice exceptional kids. And then I also have kids that have some learning disabilities and IEPs and 504s and the whole 9 yards. And I was worried that I would lose all of that if I homeschooled. And then I found, for me, it didn't matter anyway. Like, I was able to accommodate their needs better than the school services did, period.
Yeah.
What was your experience with the school, with your learning plan? What did that look like for y'all leaving the school?
Well, in public school, they were very rarely compliant. Her IEP was very limited because they didn't have a TVI. So she was getting 1 hour a week where, and that was supposed to cover braille instruction, math, because math is a different braille code, and teaching her to walk with her cane. So they were supposed to do that in an hour a week. And then obviously that wasn't possible. This teacher was incredible. The outreach one that worked 28 districts, and she was able to keep Campbell ahead academically. If Campbell had not been a gifted student, I'm not sure that would have happened. I think it would have been because she was able to keep up academically. The school wasn't too worried that her IEP wasn't completely implemented. Do you see what I mean? Yeah. So when your kid is academically on target, they're like, what are you concerned about? There are no delays. And I'm like, well, you know what? She's not going to have a human with her entire life. Because at this time she had a one-on-one. And I said, she's not going to be able to get a job if she requires a human with her all the time to transcribe everything. And it was so frustrating. But anyway, but like you said, as homeschoolers, a lot of that stuff that was in her IEP was no longer relevant because she was home. A lot of it was classroom management type things, and she wasn't in a classroom anymore. So the only things we needed from them that we couldn't do ourselves was, providing braille, because a braille textbook, a math textbook, could cost anywhere from $3,000 to $60,000 to have created. So obviously I cannot afford to do that every year. So being able to borrow braille textbooks was a huge advantage. And I don't know if we had homeschooled and not had that option. I have friends that do homeschool their braille readers without getting braille textbooks, and they just use digital braille mostly. So it is possible, but for us that was a huge advantage because the graphs and everything were accessible. And then the other thing that we needed from them was assistive technology training, which that took 10 meetings to get. And then orientation and mobility training, which is teaching her to cross streets and walk in traffic with a white cane. So it's not just learning to walk in familiar environments, but learning to map where you're going. So think about dropping a blind kid off on a college campus 900 miles away from home. If I had never pursued orientation and mobility training, that would have been extremely difficult for her to get from her dorm to class and to the dining hall and all the things without knowing how to travel and cross streets, listen for traffic patterns and that kind of stuff. So we found an instructor in a neighboring state, and I drove her there twice a month for lessons with him, and the school district did contract with him and pay for those. So those were the things that we got from them.
But you said it took 10 meetings to get that, correct?
It took 10 meetings to get the assistive technology training, who was also in another state. Mm-hmm. But how many meetings it take to get O&M? I ended up having to show up to the meeting with a list of things that blind people have to be able to do to get a guide dog. Yeah. And that hit home with them that, she won't even qualify for a guide dog if we don't get her this training. Yeah. So it was about probably 60 tasks, and she could do about 3 of them. So that was, I think, eye-opening for them. But it was, a bit of a fight. And thankfully at that time, the special ed director had changed from one person to another. And the new one was like, oh, yeah, obviously she needs that. So it was, that's kind of helped too, changing different people in charge.
Yeah. Also, I think, so my dad would come to the IEP meetings with us as well. And he didn't often speak, but when he spoke, it was something worth saying. And so I remember one of the people was asking something like, well, what do you hope to accomplish with this orientation and mobility? And my dad is like, I want her to be able to walk without getting hit by a car. And so it kind of, whipped them into shape a little bit. So a combination of that and the guide dog stuff and the new special ed director. And hadn't funding been frozen for 4 years or something?
And so that's when the funding was unfrozen too. So there was a lot of stuff going on. Yeah. So from 5th grade to 8th grade, she had zero anything blindness related, other than we just got the braille books. And then starting in 8th grade, we got orientation and mobility training. And then 2 years after that, we finally got assistive technology training. Mm-hmm. And that was...
And how were you able to do that being homeschoolers with the public school system? Like what did that take? Because
I
sometimes
think,
it like kind of cuts you off. They're like, you don't get an IEP anymore, you
and
know?
I think that's very common here. I hear from other people in our district who've been told that, and other people in neighboring districts. But I think that our school district realized at the time when that outreach program was leaving, and there wasn't going to be anybody to come in 1 hour a week, that they would be so non-compliant that it would only my only choice would be to file a lawsuit at that point, because they had no one to fill that spot and they had no prospects, and it was going to be 2 full-time employees that they were going to have to pay to be, because no one is going to move to rural Appalachia to teach one kid part-time. So there's going to have to be 2 full-time jobs. And I think they realized that if I homeschooled, that was 2 salaries they were not going to have to pay, and I could use whatever textbooks they had available, and it didn't matter if the public school changed curriculum. I could use what they used 2 years ago. I could use what they used 10 years ago. It didn't matter. It was math, you know. Mm-hmm. So I think they realized pretty quick that we would save them a ton of money if we homeschooled, and they were willing to work with us. I don't know if that happens for everyone. I do know in our state they have a program where if your kid was enrolled in public school for the whole year previous, and you're going to pull them for the next year, you can do, I cannot remember the acronym for it, but basically it's a buyout of your IEP. So you can say, okay, I forfeit all of my services. I'm going to homeschool or private school this child. You pay me, and I think it's like $3,000. It's not a ton of money. It wouldn't pay like private school tuition. But if you were homeschooling, it would be a good chunk to, go toward whatever. Yeah.
Isn't it kind of like the voucher program in other states, except it's only for students with disabilities?
Exactly. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
So you could do that as well. And if I had to go back, I might have actually accepted that. But at the time, I don't know. I don't know if I would or not, because I couldn't have gotten braille books for $3,000 a year.
Right.
Like I couldn't have afforded what she needed with that money. But if you had a kid who had maybe a speech problem or a learning disability or something that's not so expensive, then I think that would be a great deal to take.
Yeah. There was also just a lot that we didn't know about what I would need at that time.
Yeah.
Like it was our orientation and mobility instructor that we finally got, who's an amazing person, probably has influenced my life more than most people. But he was one of the ones who said, hey, you really should be presenting your math and everything digitally by now, because that's what you're going to have to do in college. And he helped us make connections with the people who finally, were able to help us, who were able to provide those services. And he connected me, until we could get those services, he connected me with someone who would teach me some of the basics for free. And then he also connected me with a mentor of mine who studied applied mathematics at Yale and is totally blind. And so she actually was the one who introduced me to the idea of applied math in the first place. He helped us a lot in that situation. And so I really think having mentors, especially when it comes to like homeschooling a kid with a disability, I think that can be really helpful, because they can help you learn, what you don't know, because it's not an extremely common experience, especially blindness is really rare. So it was good to have people in our corner who knew what we needed to be doing and how we might accomplish some of that.
And you don't know what you don't know. I talk to parents. I just talked to a parent this week whose daughter's going into public school, and their plan was for her to hold the paper really close to her face, because she can see the large E on the eye chart from 2 feet away.
Awesome. Okay.
That's the plan. That's the public school's plan.
Mm-hmm.
So she's just going to hold the page up to her
Your
nose.
job.
And so I'm like, no, that's not how it works.
Nope.
She needs braille and a cane. And she's like, well, someone's going to hold her hand through the school. The teacher will hold her hand when they're going places. And I'm like, no, that's not an appropriate plan for a child, because she's not going to be 21 years old on a college campus holding someone's hand walking to class. So I think, and that mom was just like, well, I hadn't even thought about that, like,
Yeah.
and I was like, well, you don't know what you don't know. I never met another blind person until Campbell was born. I had never known a single blind person until I held my own baby who was blind. So I didn't know either until I reached out with and talked to other parents who were steps ahead of me on this journey. When we started the college application process, I have a really good friend whose son is a year older than Campbell, and he had already done all this, and he'd worked with disability services on campus and all this, and so we knew what questions to ask. Because she helped us. So I think, and especially like these podcasts, what you're doing now is the same thing. You're mentoring people who are coming into this journey. And like Campbell said, that's so important. It's great for her to have mentors, and it's great for parents who are homeschooling to have those mentors too, because we're all just figuring it out, but there's no reason to recreate the wheel if somebody else has already been there,
It's true. And we don't, as you've mentioned, we don't know what we don't know. And so for somebody else to come along and say, oh, by the way,
Yeah.
you're going to need to know this.
Exactly.
So let's talk about moving into, like, at what point did you realize, Campbell, that I want to go to a university and I want to go to Harvard? Like, where in your journey was that decision made?
So I'll kind of answer those questions in reverse order because Harvard, I hadn't even considered it as a possibility. And after I had finished, so it was on my list just kind of as a, okay, why not kind of school. And then I actually took it off because I saw some people commenting on different social media platforms like, oh, it's so cutthroat. And it's like, okay, maybe I don't want that. Well, then I was looking at the application questions and things like that one day after I'd submitted everything else for all the other colleges that I applied to. And I was like, wouldn't it be funny if I applied and like somehow got in? And I never act on a gut feeling, but I had a gut feeling that might as well do this. I can reuse some of my essays, edit them a little bit. And
so she didn't even write original essays for Harvard. She just edited ones that she had done before.
Yeah, I think I only wrote one because like their motto is veritas, or truth. And so there was one question like, what's a time where you had to be honest, even when it might have been difficult or something like that. So I wrote an essay about that. But I think that was the only one. And then I got an interview in like February and it was like, oh, that's interesting. And then I was pretty sure that I was going to go to Georgia Tech because I'd gotten a full ride there.
Wow.
And so I was like excited about it. It was great. Well, then Ivy Day comes along, the end of March, where all the Ivy League schools release their acceptances and things, or their decisions. And I opened mine and it said, congratulations. And I was like, there's absolutely no way. So,
and it's so funny because you'll go on YouTube and you'll see people opening their acceptance letters on Ivy Day, and the parents, they're all dressed in Harvard stuff and they're all excited because that was their dream school and all this. And we were literally on vacation for spring break, and I think her dad and me and her younger sister were sitting at the dining room table. Not even, she went into another room and opened the email all by herself and just came in there and told us.
Yeah, because I never wanted to open those decisions in front of people because I didn't want whatever emotion I felt to be on display until
That's fair.
Yeah, so I always opened them by myself and then went into the, then told them. And I was not expecting to get accepted to Harvard because I had already been rejected by like Vanderbilt and Rice and a bunch of other schools. And I was like, okay, just one more. Georgia Tech's going to be great. And then I was like, oh my gosh, what do I do now? When I saw that I got into Harvard. Yeah.
It's funny. I don't know if you've ever heard of Sean Acor. He's an author, but he's also was a professor at Harvard teaching the psychology of happiness.
Oh.
And he speaks all the time. But it was so funny because he said he applied to Harvard just because he's like, why not? I mean, then I could tell people I applied to Harvard, not thinking there was any way he would ever get in.
Yeah.
And not only does he get in, he ends up teaching there for years and years.
Yeah.
So it's kind of funny. It's always those that are like, I mean, Why not? Which I think is so awesome. So,
Yeah.
okay,
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, please go ahead.
I was just going to say, as far as like college goes, I think I don't ever remember there being a question about whether I was going to go to college or not. I'm not necessarily one of those people who thinks that college is the right course for absolutely everyone. I think they're like, neither of my parents actually graduated college. So, there obviously you can do great things and not go to college. So I think that's totally fine if that's not the direction you're going to go. But I don't know. I think we just always assumed I would go to college, and I was always a math kid apparently. So I guess that was pretty obvious from the get-go.
And she's always talked like, we call her the crotchety English professor when she was little, because she talked like she was a 70-year-old English professor when she was probably 5, So I think no one except the public schools doubted that Campbell would go to college.
Interesting.
So, the low expectations there. One principal even asked me if she would need a high school diploma in her adult life, because, I don't know what career she thought she would have. I guess she thought she would live off a disability check her entire life. I don't know.
Yeah, and to make it worse, I don't think it was like a curiosity question. I think it was a rhetorical question at the time.
Yeah, because she was wanting to avoid responsibility for testing accommodations. So she was like, why are we even bothering with this? So, the rest of us never doubted that Campbell would go to college, just because she's one of those kids that loves to learn, loves to read. Is very curious about everything. She wanted to be an engineer for many years. She would say when she was little, or an inventor. She said she wanted to be an inventor when she was tiny. So it was she's just one of those kids that you're like, I don't know, we never questioned the fact that she would want to go to college. I think the first time we realized that she was not prepared for college was when we visited Georgia Tech when you were, 15?
15 or 16. Yeah.
And they were like, oh, yeah, we don't provide paper braille for anything. All of our students do everything digitally. And that's when it hit us like, oh, yeah, she's really got to learn how to do things digitally.
Yeah, because we were already in the assistive technology fight at that point and had gotten some stuff. But what we had gotten, that was when we realized it wasn't enough. Like, we had to be even more diligent than we had been, and make sure that I could do everything digitally.
And colleges have been great with accommodations, like night and day difference between colleges and the public school. And I think a lot of it is because they're not instructing you to use these things. They're just providing you what you need to do the classes. So they don't have to teach her to present her material digitally, because she already knows how to do that. But they do have to provide it in a format that is accessible with her screen reader and her braille display. And not all things are. So that is some work on their end to make sure it's accessible, but it's not like they have to instruct her to do it. So like Harvard has a whole department. What's it called?
So there's what do they call it now? They've changed their name a blue million times, but Disability Services, basically. Disability Access Office is the official name. And then the Assistive Technology Center, which is adjacent to, but not necessarily part of, the Disability Access Office. And so the Assistive Technology Center, and one person there in particular who's kind of my go-between for professors when it comes to materials, I'm primarily working with them, but Disability Access Office, or DAO, handles some of the testing accommodations and things like that. But honestly, most of the time, so I've rarely had any issues with anything accessibility-wise at Harvard once we get the initial accommodations in place. And then when issues do come up, I just go directly to the professors, and sometimes they reach out to me first, actually, when they've identified something, and they're like, hey, do we need to talk to Disability Services about this? And so sometimes we do, sometimes we get it figured out just between ourselves, and we don't have to involve them necessarily, Disability Services. And so it's just totally different. And I never expected to have teachers who would reach out on my behalf, like without me even having to ask.
Wow.
Because it was always us. Like we were always the ones.
And it was always a
trying to-
fight.
Yeah, it was
Yeah, it
always
was
a
always a
fight,
battle.
everything. And so then professors are here making suggestions. And at the community college where I went to, Pellissippi State, professors were like this. They're making suggestions for things that I hadn't even really thought about sometimes.
They were 3D printing things for her.
Yeah.
Without her asking for it.
Right. And the only thing that they really asked in return was that I show them grace and patience, and that we work collaboratively rather than me going in, guns blazing and demanding whatever I needed. So it's a totally different experience.
The atmosphere, I mean, it's just crazy. Like, I would not have believed it if someone had told me that when she was in high school, after dealing with the public school system and them just doing the bare minimum and just trying to get by with the bare minimum and not mentioning any suggestions because they don't want to pay for that and they might trap themselves in some way. An IEP meeting is supposed to be collaborative, just like the college experience is, but it's always us versus them. And it's no one, the classroom teachers are scared to death to ask any questions, because if they ask a question that costs money, they're going to be reprimanded. So it's just not a great environment for a kid with disabilities. And so the night and day difference has been shocking, absolutely shocking. And even like she said, it's been that way at both colleges she's been to.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk a little bit about the admissions process, right? Because I hear it from people all the time that are friends of mine who public school their kids, and they're like, but your kids will never get into college. Even though 2 of my kids got into college at 14 and 15 without an admission said, oh yeah, you don't need to do a dual enrollment, but it'll pay for it if you do dual, but all you need to do is apply and pay the money and take the Accuplacer test. That's it. But share your experience, what you were looking for, because let's talk about transcripts and the application process, because I think I have been told by people, they're like, no, your kids can't go to college without a diploma. And I'm like, no, I'm telling you, they have, and they can continue to do so. What is your experience? Here you are at an Ivy League. Let's talk about that.
Well, the dual enrollment process was very easy. Campbell handled it herself, actually. She just called the school and arranged all of it, pretty much.
There was like an online application. And honestly, it wasn't even an application in the sense that you would have a college application, because there were no essays or anything like that. I think you were basically just guaranteed acceptance as long as you fit the grade requirements and everything. As in, like, you had completed relevant coursework before
I signed up for the next one.
Yeah.
And like, even so her first dual enrollment class was Spanish, and we had done Spanish 1 at a co-op in 8th grade, correct? And that was like the most intense class I've ever sat in.
It's crazy.
That lady, like, I took Spanish in college, and I took 5 semesters of Spanish, and that class was harder than any college class I ever had. And because there's no IEP, in a co-op situation, I stayed there to accommodate. And like, the lady was writing on the board, and I would take notes for Campbell, because she would not read what she was writing even after I asked her to. So we did that for 1 year. And after it was over, I was like, I really feel like that was Spanish 1 and Spanish 2 in one class. And so we Googled it. Actually, I guess we looked at the specific school you were going to go to, like what you had to do, what the syllabus was going to be for the next class.
Yeah.
And there was one verb conjugation that she hadn't learned yet that she needed to know. So we YouTubed that, she learned it, and then we signed up for Spanish 3 and skipped Spanish 2. So I just put on her transcript for 8th grade that she did Spanish 1 and Spanish 2, even though at the co-op, it was technically just Spanish 1. But as parents, you're in charge. So she YouTubed that one conjugation, and she fulfilled the requirement for both. So I just put both on her transcript, even though she technically only took Spanish 1. And then she went right into Spanish 3, or whatever they call in college, and made like 100 in the class. She was probably one of the only kids that ever showed up. This was during during COVID, so it was online. And she would be like, yeah, I was the only one there today, so just me and the professor talked and, in Spanish and had fun. And there's like still talk to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And then so she took the next level after that and made like an A in that too. And so they never even asked at the college what Spanish she had had. It was at my discretion. Now for math, it was different. You did have to have, because she was going to take Calc 2,
Mm-hmm.
she did have to have proven that she had taken Calc 1, which was for her AP Calculus AB, and she took the AP exam to test into that. Or she would have had to take their test to test into that. Okay. So we just used her AP score to get into that one. Mm-hmm. And then biology, it didn't matter, right?
Yes.
We just signed up for biology. No one cared what she'd done previously. Well, but you did have an ACT score at that point.
Yeah. The only thing that mattered for biology is there was a biology for majors and a biology for non-majors. Mm-hmm. And so I think I spoke with an advisor and was like, I'm interested in majoring in applied math, but also biology, potential medical research. And she was like, yeah, you need the biology for majors. So I took that and had a really good experience with
She ended up winning, what was it called? A Life Sciences Student of the Year.
Like Excellence in Life Sciences or something.
Yeah, out of all the college kids at the so it was like, it was not intimidating at all doing the dual enrollment process. I mean, it was very simple. Now going into applying to four-year schools was a little more intimidating because like you had heard all about this process and how competitive it was. And she knew she was possibly wanting to go to an elite school because her friend who'd been to Yale as an applied math major was like, no one questions whether I can do my job because I graduated from Yale. Because she's a blind woman in the STEM field. But if she was going into the STEM field as a blind woman who had graduated from a community college or something, they may have questioned her abilities. So she was like, you want to have as much status as you can have on that college experience. So we knew that she was going to lean toward an elite school of some sort. But she was also fine with finishing up at Pellissippi State for 2 years and then transferring. So we didn't have a dream school.
Yeah.
Right?
I actually made a point not to have a dream school because I knew it was such a lottery.
At these acceptance rates, like the year she got into Harvard was 3.19% acceptance rate. And she applied regular decision, which ended up being like a 1 point something acceptance rate because they already had their early decision people in the, that had already accepted. So when you're playing odds like that, it is really a lottery. You apply to a bunch and then hope for the best. Yeah, but she ended up getting into 9 schools with over $800,000 in offers. And it was fine. I mean, I won't say it was easy because she wrote, I think, about 50 essays because she was chasing merit. So every time there was a scholarship that she might be qualified for, she applied for it.
Or a research program or anything.
Yeah. So we started that process probably in the spring of your junior year.
Yes. So that's when we started it, but we had already, our cousin teaches AP English at our local high school, but she also helps kids who don't really have any other people to help them go through college application process. And so she, even before we really got started, she was kind of helping us make sure that we were on the right track. And let me tell you, like, when I was going through a lot of this, I was afraid, the main thing I was afraid of is that I wouldn't have enough extracurriculars, which it ended up being fine. But the only things I had really done were I had been doing classical piano by that point for about 11 years. And then I'd had a job as a website accessibility tester. So that was a pretty neat job to put on my transcript. But we figured out you can count a lot of things as extracurriculars. So sometimes I would go around to schools and talk to elementary school students about blindness and like the assistive technology that I use and that kind of thing. And then other times with a club of blind people in Knoxville, which is near us, I had done some things like a walk for cancer, or we did a fundraiser called Dueling Devices, where we pitted Amazon Echo and Google Home against each other, and actually like scripted them to make them argue at one point. So like
Awesome.
you could put those kinds of things on as extracurriculars. And so there are some people who think like, oh, I've even heard some Harvard students say this, like, I did some of these extracurriculars like speech and debate and things, not because I enjoyed them, but because I thought that this is what I would need to get into Harvard. And obviously they did, but honestly, the people who seem like they most belong there are the ones who just pursued things that they really enjoyed in school, and so they were able to, write genuinely good things about those experiences in their essays if they were asked about them, and they could remember them with fondness and talk about them, in their interviews if they got those. So honestly, like, don't try to force things that you don't really enjoy, especially when it comes to extracurriculars, because I think colleges prefer to see that you've dedicated. They would rather you be dedicated fully to one or two things than to be all over the place and not really dedicated to anything, I think. Or at least that seems to be what the trend is right now.
Yeah. So back in the day when I applied 100 years ago, they wanted well-rounded students, is what we always heard. And now the advice is to be pointy, to find what you enjoy and to pursue that with passion so that you can be excited about something when you're writing these essays and when you're talking with your interviewer. Like Campbell and her interviewer, she had written how many words of Harry Potter fan fiction in high school?
Probably like 15,000-ish words.
15,000 words. And so she and her Harvard interviewer bonded over Harry Potter, talking about the stuff that the fan fiction that she wrote. So
yeah, and this wasn't anything that was even published anywhere. This was just something I did because I wanted to.
Just for fun.
You loved it. Yeah.
But see, that's the kind of thing. It's just something you love and you have that to talk about. So it's not like, so I work with high school seniors, public school seniors every year. I choreograph a musical for them, and it's so fun. But they have their I'm speaking to an adult mode, and I'm speaking to my friends mode, and I'm being my true self is somewhere in the middle of there. Whereas I feel like homeschooled kids especially are just who they are all the time. And they will talk to an adult or a 3-year-old just as easily as they would talk to someone their own age. And they can have real conversations, and they're not nervous around grown-ups. And they don't have that mentality like I need to filter myself because I'm with an adult. They can have a real conversation. And I think that was a huge part of it too, because she was comfortable speaking about the things that she enjoys doing, and she wasn't worried that she was going to be criticized for being some sort of absurd nerd for writing 15,000 words of Harry Potter fan fiction. You know what I mean? And because they don't have that peer stuff going on and the fear of not being accepted all the time, that kind of stuff,
Yeah. Also, sorry.
No, please go ahead.
Also, I knew that my alumni interviewer, just based on his email signature, was in physics at Harvard. So I figured that the absurd nerd line had already long been crossed.
That's true.
Well, no, I think you bring up an interesting point, because a couple months ago, I threw a little, it was a Pride and Prejudice party.
I'm going to Pride and Prejudice weekend, like next month. I'm so excited.
I'm so jealous. I won't be home.
We invited some kids and their moms, some girls and their moms from an enrichment program we belong to, and it's for teenagers, and their younger sisters came too, and the moms came, and we did a fondue thing, and then we were going to watch Pride and Prejudice. Mm-hmm. Well, some older ladies at church were like, "Oh, can we come to this?" And it's funny because I actually didn't invite the other, like the public school kids from church, because I felt like they'd be like,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So the older ladies came, and the comment that one of these ladies said is, here she's retired, she has grandkids, she's an empty nester. And I said, "What did you think?" And she's like, "I've never experienced anything quite like it. All these girls talk to me like I was their equal, and I loved it.
Mm-hmm.
She said, they asked me what I thought about Mr. Darcy. They asked me what, as if I was one of them and I wasn't separate. Because at that point I was like carrying dishes up. And she's like, if you do something like this with the homeschool kids again, I will, I would love it. She goes, and I didn't know that's how homeschool kids behave. I didn't realize that. She's like, my perspective is shifted. They treated me like a human and not like I was this something set apart from them.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it's true because, and all the moms were there too. Like the moms were interacting with the girls and your little sisters were there and everyone was talking about Mr. Darcy and, and anyway, it was so fun. It was so fun.
Yeah.
So
I think,
go ahead. Yes, please go ahead.
I think one of the most fun things we did like that is we had a series of unfortunate events party one time. Oh, it was so much fun. My daughter would
die.
It was so fun. We call it party school because in Brave Writer, in each of their lit guides, at the end of the lit guide, they have suggestions for party school. Mm-hmm. So, we would celebrate. We tried, because I have a 6-year age gap between my girls, we tried to read one book together every month or so and then do a party school of some sort, whether it was like just eating something from that culture that was in the book or watching the movie version or whatever. But the series of unfortunate events, it was fun. Yeah. We did one for the Princess Bride too.
Oh, that one was really fun too. I forgot.
Yeah. So that kind of stuff is awesome. And as far as like the older adults go, some of Campbell's best friends are in their 80s.
Yeah.
So,
and I've also for a lot of my life felt the people treating me like someone or something set apart thing, talking to me like I'm 5. And so it's really nice not to have that. And in college, I think everyone's just trying to live on their own for the first time. And so everybody, survive. And just survive. So nobody really does that. But I think in other places I had, especially in public school, a lot of times adults would talk to me like I was, 5 when I was not. And so being able to be in a situation where people of all ages will talk to each other as equals, I think that's my favorite kind of environment.
And I think she thrives in college because she does form relationships with her professors and her TAs and all that stuff. And a lot of that's because she does have accommodations, so she has to work with them a little bit more one-on-one than a typical student would. But also, she stays in touch with them. Like, she emails back and forth with professors she's had. Every time we go, like, for move in or move out, we meet with when she had her freshman year, and he just wants updates on her life. And, like, he and his wife couldn't go to the symphony one weekend, and they have season tickets. So he was like, Campbell, would you like our tickets? And she and a friend went, So I think homeschool kids just have a leg up as far as building relationships with the grown-ups. Not that she's not a grown-up now, but people who are older.
It's different. Yeah. It's different. Okay, let's talk about transcripts for a little bit, because that's something that you and I had talked about, all three of us had talked about, but creating transcripts, because nobody said, hey, can we get your high school diploma? Not one university, because as you mentioned prior to recording this, nobody has a diploma when they apply for colleges as most of the time, incoming freshmen, unless they're like a non-traditional student. And you had done an extra year of concurrent enrollment. You had done a 5th year of concurrent enrollment. And then as you're creating your transcripts, let's talk about what to put on the transcript and what not to put on the transcript and spend so much time on.
So Campbell's transcript is literally just a list of classes. It started in 8th grade. She has a column for each grade, and in our state, you can get some high school credits in middle school. So we did Spanish, I think was it. We did some other classes.
And forensic science.
Yeah, we did forensic science as well, which would count toward a physical science credit. But she ended up doing so much science in high school that she didn't need that on her transcript, so I just took it off. So we just put Spanish because she did need 4 years of Spanish, a foreign language, for a lot of the schools. Well, I think they require 3, recommend 4 for some of the schools she was applying to.
I thought it was required 2, recommend 3.
Maybe that's it, yeah. So you just have to look at what colleges you're interested in to see what they require, and then you kind of build the transcript around that. And like she said, I have a cousin who teaches AP English and helps kids with their college applications. And so she helped me understand what a public school transcript would look like. And so we kind of followed like 4 sciences, 4 Englishes, 4 maths, that kind of stuff. So that her transcript would look as normal as possible. But it's basically just an Excel spreadsheet with the grade, what class she took, what
Just a
credit
name of
she
a class,
got.
right?
Yeah, just the name of the class. That's it. So like Algebra 1. It does, and actually a lot of hers we would give her honors credit because she is such a nerd that she would fall into like a rabbit hole of research and do a bunch of extra work because she liked it so much. So I would ask my public school teacher friends, I would be like, would you qualify this as an honors class? And they're like, yeah, that's way more than what we would do in an honors class. So I would give her honors. I would put HN beside it if she got honors credit. And that helps because it weights your GPA a little higher. So like for honors credit, you get like 0.5 extra points or something. And then, so we did that from 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade. And then since she took a 5th year, we had another 12th grade underneath there. And I know lots of people freak out about the 5th year and say, oh, you have to do a subject transcript and blah, blah, blah. Nobody cared. Nobody ever questioned. There was a place in the Common App where you could put if you graduated late, I think is how they worded it. And because she had taken the ACT before we decided to add the 5th year, she had 2 different graduation dates on paperwork sometimes. So like her projected graduation date when she took the ACT was a year sooner. Mm-hmm. So we thought, it's best to probably address that in the Common App. So if anyone has any questions, so she just wrote a little paragraph about why we took the 5th year, and literally nobody cared.
Yeah. Also, I'm not sure if we have yet addressed what the Common App is on the recorded podcast.
I was about to ask that, is to explain what the Common App is. This is really cool. And I actually just heard about this today.
Yeah.
For the first time.
Yeah. So I think there are actually 2 different ones. There's the Common App and then there's the Coalition App. But most people use the Common App. And basically it's a place, it's kind of a centralized place where you can have most of your college applications. And so you fill out a bunch of demographic information on the Common App, and it's an online thing. So you fill out all your demographic information and you write a personal statement based on one of like 7 different prompts you can choose from. And then once you've done that, then you select all of the schools that you're interested in applying to in the Common App. And then you can just go down that list and choose which school you want, and then go through and answer that school's specific questions. And there's a lot of demographic information, and like
14 pages, I think.
Yeah. And you also put like, you can upload your resume and I think your transcript, like your unofficial transcript too. But you also maybe put something about your most influential extracurricular activities, or
I think there's a list, like you can pick your top however many extracurriculars that you want.
Yeah. And then like, I can't remember if this was school specific or in the Common App, but there may be a place where you put the courses that you've taken that most align with what you might want to study in school. So it's a good centralized place to have everything, and then you can keep track of all your deadlines using the Common App. I think they actually send you emails
reminding you that deadline's coming up. Yeah.
Right. Oh, and really briefly, I want to talk about the different kinds of the different kinds of decisions you can submit, or like application types for different colleges, kind of based on the timeline, because you may hear the words early action, restrictive early action, early decision, and regular decision kind of thrown around, and it gets confusing which one it is. Early action by itself just means you're applying to that school early, like by a certain deadline, usually November 1st. Usually November 1st, yeah. And you're applying early, and so it maybe gives you a little bit of a boost in your admissions chance. And then you get your decision earlier. Restrictive early action, which I think is what most of the Ivy Leagues do, is where you apply. Once you've applied to that school, you cannot apply to any other private schools, but you can apply to state schools if you want to. But you're restricted to only apply to that private school if you apply restrictive early action. Early decision means if you get into that school, you are going there. When you apply, you're making a commitment to go there. So I did not apply any schools early decision, I don't think.
No, because you're financially obligated.
Right.
Like before you get your financial offer.
Right.
I think you can get out of it if it's like you ran the net price calculator, which is like an estimate of how much that school will cost you. You can put in your financials. Because schools like Harvard and Vanderbilt and Yale, and there are several that are what we call CSS profile schools. They take the FAFSA, but they also have a second financial aid application called the CSS profile. And they take into account many more things about your life, and they're usually more generous with their financial aid. So if you ran the net price calculator, say for Harvard, and it said you were going to owe $10,000 a year instead of $90,000, and then you get to your actual financial aid offer from them in the spring, and it's $50,000 a year that they're expecting you to pay, then you can say, oh, you have a copy of your net price calculator. And you say, well, when we applied restrictive, whatever, early decision, we thought it was going to be $10,000, so we can't afford this. And you can get out of it that way. But I think it's a whole process. So we didn't do anything that was restrictive because we didn't know how much money she was going to get from any of these schools. So we just did the normal path.
Were you able to get scholarships and financial aid to Harvard? Because I know that, like, for me, there's no way I could afford to, like.
It's so funny because they're so generous because they have what's it called, a $40 billion endowment.
Yeah.
So it's different. It's cheaper for us to send her to Harvard than it would have been for our state flagship school.
Yeah,
and that's all need based. That's based on our income. We don't qualify for anything with the FAFSA, but with the CSS profile at our income, we qualify for great financial aid at Harvard.
Yeah. And one of the things that I think is important for students and parents is make sure that you're on the same financial page before you apply. Because we visited Vanderbilt when I was, I think 14 or 15 maybe. And we didn't know about need-based financial aid at that point. And Mom was like, just so you know, we can't afford to pay for you to go here. We're just looking to see, what it might be like. And of course we found out about need-based financial aid, but we agreed before I applied to any colleges, the whole family agreed that if I didn't get enough financial aid to cover me, where I wouldn't have to take out any loans, and I was going to finish up at community college, which would have been totally fine, I think. But I wanted no student loans, and we knew that from the get-go. So finances were definitely a huge factor in my decision.
It's like shopping, you're just shopping for the best deal. And out of those 9 acceptances, 3 were affordable. Mm-hmm. So even with as many academic scholarships as she would get from places, sometimes we still owed, like after they gave her their maximum amount of academic scholarships, it would still be like $30,000 a year for us. And I was like, no, we're not doing that. You can go to community college 2 years for free, and she agreed. She didn't want, $120,000 in student loans at 4 years, And so of the 3, she picked the second best deal, which actually might have been, because the funny thing is you have to pay taxes on academic scholarships. So anything over tuition, like room and board, meal plan, anything extra, you have to pay taxes on that as if it's income. So she got a full ride to Georgia Tech, but the taxes we would have had to pay on her full ride to Georgia Tech were going to be more than what we paid for her to go to Harvard, our part. So it ended up, actually Harvard ended up being the best deal. And there was no GPA requirement, which hasn't been an issue because she's got an A average, but at Georgia Tech, it was the STAMP scholarship. And so she had to keep a 3.2 GPA, which is not difficult for an academic kid typically. But what if she got a horrible professor one semester, or just had a mental breakdown one semester? You never know what's going to happen. So that just takes some of the pressure off, that she doesn't have to keep that GPA if she doesn't.
Yeah.
If it doesn't happen.
Yeah. So. I will say the STAMPS program, though, is a really cool program. So, if you definitely apply to Georgia Tech or schools that offer it, because.
Yeah, it was really neat.
How do you spell? Is it STAMS? Is that right?
Stamps, like a stamp on a letter. Yeah. And I think it was actually called this.
What does it stand for?
I don't really know. It's the Stamps Presidential Scholarship, and I think there are only like 40 something schools in the country that offer it. Because I think I learned that in one of the presentations. But it was like,
so, and Harvard's one of those?
No, Georgia Tech.
Georgia Tech was it? Okay.
Harvard only gives need-based aid. They don't give athletic scholarships. They don't give academic scholarships. It's only need-based aid at the Ivies.
Yeah, because if you gave, I don't even know how you would go about giving academic scholarships at the Ivies.
Yeah, because every kid there has
everybody.
Everybody's got over a 4.0 who's there, so,
So before we were recording, we talked about back to the transcripts. You got creative with some of the classes. And when back to when we were talking about the Spanish, I think it's interesting because like people are like, oh, you have to have 120 hours spent on the subject, but yet here you showed that you did Spanish 1 and 2. Of course, you should get credit for that. Like in my, and does the university care? No. You show you know what you know and keep going. So let's talk about the creativity with the transcripts, because there's stuff like we have. I'm an unschool. I'm an eclectic unschooler. So yes, we do some curriculums with some things sometimes, but there's other stuff like my son reading 10 personal development books and then financial business books, where I'm going to have to be creative with his transcript. So let's talk about what y'all did with that.
I like to call that planning from behind. I think that's what Julie Bogart calls it in Brave Rider, because your kid is going to fall into some interests, and those things. One of the hugest perks of homeschooling is that they can have the freedom to do that. So Campbell had a friend that was diagnosed with autism, and so she wanted to learn about autism. She read probably 15 books about autism. So I was like, I have to give you credit for that because you spent so much time doing it. And I asked one of my friends that teaches public school, I said, what can we call this class? And she said, well, let me see what book she read. And I showed her, and she was like, I think you could call it behavior analysis with a focus on autism. And I was like, all right. So that's what's on her transcript. And she has a credit for that. And of course it's an elective, but it's a credit. And it's an interesting one. We did the same thing for leadership and personal development. Mm-hmm. My other child is a dancer. So I put fine arts credits for all. I mean, she's at rehearsal 6 to 7 days a week. Of course, I'm going to give her credit for that. And I also counted as PE. So she doesn't need to go learn to play basketball because she's working out many nights a week, So we don't add extra work that we don't need unless we have to. So like Campbell had to have an economics credit. That was one thing she was not interested in. So I just found a book list of books that I think it was college reading list for economics. And I said, here's a book list.
Yeah.
Work your way through that.
And I think actually for economics, I mostly did crash course because I watched a lot of YouTube videos for
lectures and stuff,
which it's really funny because now one of my favorite professors at Harvard is an economics professor.
So you have something to talk to him about because you did tough it out through a few economics books.
Yeah.
So
and I did study. Yeah, I did for whatever reason have an interest in the development in like the Russian and Chinese revolutions and like the communist revolutions and things like that. So I usually studied more of the social side of things, like what life actually looked like for people on the ground. But I kind of got some economic theory thrown in there too. So
she fell into a hole of I think it started with the Cinderella story, a Chinese version of the Cinderella story, right?
Yes, I think
So
it
she
did.
fell into a hole of research about ancient China. So I gave her an ancient history credit for that, you know? So if you're, now my other child doesn't necessarily love to research things unless it's Harry Styles or Taylor Swift. So she's currently working on a farm. And so I'll give her credit for that because she's having to incubate quail eggs and she's learning to freeze dry food and she's milking goats and breeding goats and, you know, all the things she's learning there. So you just have to be creative, you know, like you said. I wouldn't say we're completely unschoolers because I did know that Campbell wanted to, her transcript needed to look kind of typical. So we did have, you know, biology and chemistry and all of that. But, and we did use curriculum for that. We used a lot of guest hollow because if you are eclectic, they are perfect because it's just a book list and a bunch of YouTube videos and then some labs that they suggest. And you can pick and choose like a buffet, what interests you.
Yeah.
And
it's called Guest Hollow.
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And I'll put links to all of this stuff, by the way, in the Common App and everything in the show notes. So you can keep talking.
Yeah.
Keep talking.
But they were incredible. Campbell loved them because all of those books were on Bookshare. She could read them at her own time, at her own pace. And she would put headphones on and do laundry and be doing chemistry at the same time, you know, or taking a walk in the yard and listening to her physics curriculum. So we're very flexible in that way. But her transcript still looks fairly normal except for the creative stuff like the autism class and the, you know, a few things here and there.
Oh, and music history.
Oh yeah, music history because she's a competitive pianist, and each year for KMTA auditions they had to take a music history exam, and so she would study whatever time period was for that. So I gave her a music history class for that because she had to study. She didn't know what was going to be on the test, so she had to study that whole time period. But as far as tests go in our home, I never test my kids. I never quiz my kids. I never grade anything. And everybody's like, how do you make a transcript if you never grade anything? Well, we work to mastery. So say for math, if she's working on something in math, probably all the way up into algebra, you would do the chapter review and the chapter test. Right?
Yeah.
And then if there was anything she missed, she would go back in the chapter and work those problems.
Learn it. Yeah. Yeah.
But I mean, probably from 5th grade to algebra, she might have missed 5 problems. So it was not like, imagine if we had done all of those lessons and all of those problems, 110 volumes of braille math, for no reason because she already knew how to do those things. So it's a total waste of time. So my other kid doesn't feel as strongly about her skills in math, even though she's very good at math. So she does do each lesson, but I give her the freedom. She doesn't have to complete all the problems if she doesn't think she needs to. I said, if you do 3 and you know it, then move on to the next thing. Yeah. And she grades her own work. I don't grade it. She tells me what she made. And then when she completes, because we don't move on until they know what they're doing, then she gets an A.
Mastered it.
Yeah. So mastery is an A, and that's what they get, an A on their transcript. So, and then like the books, I never tested her on behavior analysis with autism. She just read all of those books. We had conversations about them. So she gets an A, you know.
Well, because I mean, when you think about it, because like really, what does a grade show? It shows that you can regurgitate the information that the instructor wants you to regurgitate. And had you given her tests on those books, you know, Campbell, you probably learned all this cool stuff that may or may not have been on a test. You know what I mean? Like we're jumping through hoops, but yet this amazing learning was happening, like this crazy, all this beautiful, you know, things happening in the brain, all the, you know, all these wonderful experiences, and real mastery is happening.
Right.
And a real tailored education is happening, which is what as parents we want our kids to experience, is like an education for them.
Right. And I don't have 30 kids that I'm monitoring. No. I only have 2. No. So I can have a conversation with them and understand what they're understanding about it. And if they're misunderstanding anything, I don't need them to write me an essay on every topic or, you know, take a quiz at every chapter or anything like that, because they're telling me what they're learning, you know.
Yeah. So my 16-year-old just read Frankenstein. Actually, it was a couple months ago that she read it. And because she and I came up with a book list last year, like, okay, what do you want to read? And then what are some would be some books that would be a challenge to you? And that was on the list. And so I was asking her about it. I'm like, so what did you think? And she got in an argument with her brother, who sometimes is a know-it-all, and he's never read Frankenstein. But he's heard about it. And she's like, you cannot talk. Anyway, but so she and I sat down, and I said, she had just finished reading the book, and she had this really contemplative look on her face. And I said, what is going on in your brain right now? And she kind of put down the book, and she's like, I was expecting this to be a horror story. And she said, it is deeply, deeply sad. She said, it makes me sad. And then we have this beautiful conversation about why and like what's going on in her heart and her feelings towards the doctor and the monster and like all of these things. And I thought, if she was in an English class, all of this would be lost. You know what I mean? Like with the professor saying, please write an analysis paper on this. Instead, she had the freedom just to think about what she thought about the experience of what she just read. You know what I mean? Like, and I thought, wow, there is power in just the conversations about what's on her mind about this thing. So anyway, side story. Yeah. And now my 8-year-old said, I think I need to read Frankenstein. I'm like, I think your reading level is not quite there yet. We'll read a simpler version. Yeah.
Also, if she liked Frankenstein and she hasn't read Dracula, she should read Dracula.
Oh, she has not read Dracula, so we will put that on the list for this year.
Yeah. Yeah, it's also very good, in my opinion.
Last thoughts and advice that you'd want to give to people pulling their kids from the system, or it's their first year, or even they're going into their second year and there's still a lot of nervousness. What would you say to those parents?
I think everyone should try homeschooling at least once. I didn't know that I would love it, and I didn't know that Campbell would love it. I didn't know that my other child would love it, but we tried it, and it is probably one of the greatest things we've ever done for our family. Wouldn't you think?
I agree.
And our family is so much closer. Like, my kids are 6 years apart, so they would have never seen each other. They would have never been in the same school building. I don't know if they would even know each other really if they would live in the same home sometimes, if we hadn't been crammed in here all day every day together, right? Yeah. And I think it's not as scary as you think it's going to be, and it is a lot of responsibility because you are the person that's going to be in charge of making that transcript, but it's also a lot of control that you have that public school parents don't have. Like, when your kids are graduating from public school, you had no control over what their transcript looked like, right? Like, you couldn't remove forensic science from 8th grade, or like Campbell had too many fine arts credits. Not that there's ever too many, but I mean, she had 41 credits with the next year of high school. And I was like, and that was after I whittled it down, And so I cannot remember how many you started out with. I think it might have been 48 or 51 or something. So I had to whittle away some of these, take some out, because it was just over the top how many credits she had. And then, if she'd been in public school, first of all, she wouldn't have had that many credits because she wouldn't have been able to explore that many avenues. But we wouldn't have had control over what it looked like either. So we have, with the responsibility comes an element of freedom and control that is priceless, I think.
Yeah. I also think I got to know both of my parents as people and not just figures of authority. And so I think it helped me, especially as I got older, it helped me understand that when they gave advice or told me to do something, I could usually understand the reasoning behind it. And so I learned to respect them as humans and not just as figures of authority, even though they remained that. And I also got to spend a lot of time with my dad that I probably wouldn't have gotten to spend with him. We read a lot of books together. We read Les Mis. We read Atlas Shrugged, which was an adventure. We read, what else did we read?
I was going to say 60 pages of a John Galt speech.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. And we read sometimes just read things concurrently, not necessarily in the same room.
Especially when he was out of town, that was a great way for us to stay connected, because he would travel, and I mean, he would be gone as long as 23 days sometimes, and we would get to have a short phone call in the evening because he's working out in the field all day, 18-hour days. And so for us to all stay connected, reading the same books and have something to talk about.
Yeah.
Besides what cat did what that day, so.
Which provides plenty of conversational opportunities, but still.
Yeah. I think, and the funny thing is, he was never a reader until he started traveling for work. And then he started listening to audiobooks just to pass the time, because they drive all over the 48 states. So he would listen to books, and then we would have something to talk about. And then I think he says he never read an entire book, even through college, because he was an engineer major, so he didn't have any of the liberal arts stuff he had to do. So it's just been a great experience for all of us. And one thing I forgot to mention about the course description thing, when you're making your transcript.
I wanted to come back to this because I thought, oh no, the course, this is super important. Yeah, please bring it up. The course description, guys, listen to this carefully.
So we're told, we have to keep a list of all the classes, which is true. You do have to keep a list of what classes they take in each grade. For us, we use an umbrella school, so we have to submit that stuff at Christmas and in June every year. We just type it in. It's always editable, though. It's not permanent. It's just a good way to keep track. And then they report to the state for us. And it's literally...
And it just looks like an Excel spreadsheet,
yes.
Right?
And it's just the class, the credit, and the grade they got, what year they took the class. Just the name of the class. But I was advised by other homeschoolers that I needed to keep a list of course descriptions. So every time she would take a class, I would write a brief paragraph about that class in a Word document on my computer. Well, then once we started applying to colleges, I had this, document with all of the classes and the paragraph with each one, and then also a separate document that was all the books that she read, since we did a lit-based homeschool. So I listed every book that she ever read, and I think it was like 1,000 books. So it was crazy. And no one has ever seen those documents, because not one single of the 16 colleges that she applied to requested them. And I was told, don't submit those by a college advisor. Don't submit the course descriptions or the book list unless they ask for it. So you just submit your application as it is, and then later, if they need more, they will ask for it. And no one asked for it. Harvard asked for an updated transcript after her first semester to see what grades she got at Christmas. Did Georgia Tech ask for one too?
I think
Georgia Tech did too.
Mm-hmm.
But there was no description needed. It was just what grades she made to make sure she hadn't failed everything, that first semester of her senior year.
Yeah.
And then after she accepted Harvard, they requested one in May after graduation, just to confirm that she passed all of her required classes. And that was it.
Yeah. I will say it might benefit you to keep track of your extracurricular activities and about how many hours you spend on those.
Yeah, because they do ask how many hours and weeks or months or whatever. So like if you're a Girl Scout and you're doing a gold project, you would want to keep track of how many hours you spend on that, so you could get credit for that from them, because they're going to be like, oh wow, she spent this many hours on that.
Yeah, they will ask for a resume on the Common App. And usually, like when it comes to college applications, if they say something is optional, that means mandatory. So
Yes.
yeah. So
fill in that.
Yes, definitely. And so yeah, keep track of those. Keep track of any awards that you win, even if it's just something local.
Yeah, because you forget those things. You don't realize how quick you're going to forget it.
Yeah, or anytime you're like in a local newspaper or anything like that, you can keep track of those, because you can make it look good on a resume.
You're selling yourself to these schools. You want to look like the best candidate. So you keep track of those things so that you can. And even on the Common App, there's a place where you can submit a digital portfolio.
Right. So I think some of the things that I did was, so I made a compilation of like clips of piano performances throughout high school. And then we
submitted pictures of her climbing a huge tower. Because People have biases about blindness, and they think those poor, pitiful kids won't be able to handle it. So we wanted to put things on there that showed that she was kayaking or whitewater rafting or climbing a giant, how many feet tower was that? 50-foot tower, rappelling. Is that what it's called? All of that stuff, just to show, because if you've never met a blind person, you don't really know what they're capable of, just to show she did normal things.
Yeah. I also included 2 short papers that I had written that I liked. One was about common challenges between blind and autistic individuals, and one was an overview of Zoom security that I wrote at the beginning of COVID.
I didn't even know she submitted those.
Because my
holy cow.
Yeah, so my dad sometimes had me write essays about like technical things. So one time I wanted a social media something or other, and he was like, okay, write me an essay, do some research about it, and write me an essay about why you should or should not have it. So I did a bunch of research and actually concluded that I shouldn't have it, and so wrote an essay saying that I shouldn't have it.
Awesome.
And then
and that wasn't homeschool. That was just his parenting style.
Yeah.
That was just being that's what my husband would be like. Make an argument and then present it to me.
Yeah. And then at the beginning of COVID, he was like, they're not letting us use Zoom at work because of some security stuff. So you might want to look into that. And actually, just for the sake of practicing formatting a paper for my assistive technology instructor, I actually had to write an essay about something anyway, like a research paper. So I was like, okay, I might as well write about this. So I went down a whole rabbit hole of Zoom security, which kind of got me interested in cybersecurity stuff. And so, I submitted those 2 papers, and I think like any certificates or things that I had gotten.
Yeah, because she got an AP Scholar because of the exam she took. And
then also when I was certified as a website tester, I submitted that certificate, I think.
So yeah, you just keep up with it. And then even like the college advisor that we talked to, she said, if you were responsible for childcare for your siblings every day for your entire high school career, you put that on there. Like anything that you did that shows commitment or dedication to something, you put that on there. And so she has a good book. I cannot remember the name of it, but her name is Dr. Gina Lester. Mm-hmm. I think it's do you remember the name of the book? Uniquely, I don't know, something unique is in the title.
Uniquely You or something.
Yeah, something like that. But it's talking about the college application process and how to put your best foot forward in that whole process.
Yeah. I think if you can, they can be expensive. The only reason we were able to pay for services with a college advisor, I think, was because we actually Mom won a drawing. And so
she was very helpful. I think you could do it without it. I think with my second one, I won't need that because I'll understand the Common App and all these things that I didn't know anything about going into it with Campbell. But she was very good about suggesting things. And now I've done it once. I probably wouldn't. I probably won't do it again.
Yeah.
But, and all that to say, this is for competitive schools. Like if you're applying to just your state flagship or your community college, they're not going to ask for any of this. Like you're just going to turn in a transcript. Maybe if you took the ACT and ACT score, if you don't have an ACT score, you'll probably do like their own testing that they have at the school to find like your appropriate math placement or whatever. But for these competitive schools and then the research programs she wanted to be in and the honors schools, honors colleges at the specific schools, all of that is what required all this extra stuff that she did. Most schools, you're not going to even need that for the application. Don't you think, Campbell?
Yeah.
I mean, you're going to do your personal statement essay. That goes in the Common App for everyone to see. Mm-hmm. But then beyond that, some schools don't require anything extra. So.
Yeah. It really just depends on what you're looking for. And so my third choice after Georgia Tech was University of Alabama because they offer automatic merit money for if you get an ACT score of, was it like 30 or higher or something?
And there's different tiers. Like you get this much money if you made a 30, this much if you made 32, whatever.
Yeah. And they also had some really good research programs and stuff. So like, I wasn't just looking at elite schools. I was looking at schools that would
pay you to go.
Yeah. That was the top requirement. Also, I was looking for schools that had, at least some of them, that had a blind student in a math or science field before, because I wanted them to kind of know what they were doing in that regard. So I wasn't having to spend all my time trying to teach them how to teach me. It wasn't, some people might mistake this. It wasn't necessarily because I felt like I needed a blind community or something in college, although that has been nice because there have been some blind students there. It was purely for practical reasons that I wanted to find a school that had hopefully had blind students in math or science before.
Yeah, because it's a different ballgame. Like humanities and STEM with accessibility are two different ballgames completely. So that was a requirement. But otherwise, like the local Tennessee Tech, you didn't have to do hardly anything to apply there, right?
Right. And I have some friends who are going to Austin P right now in Tennessee. I think it's a state school. Yeah, it's a state school. And I don't think they had to do too much either. And they're both doing really well there. And we have a homeschool friend who did 2 years of community college and then went to a small liberal arts school here, and I think majored in business. And she didn't really have to turn in a whole lot of things, I don't think.
I don't even think she had test scores because that was during COVID. So
yeah,
she didn't even have to submit test scores.
Yeah.
And she ended up graduating top in her class too.
Well, and I think there's that misconception that like, oh, you have to have a high school diploma and you're going to have this and you're going to have that and you're going to have this. And the truth is it's not.
And the diploma is not even a big deal. Like you can find a template online, fill it in, and print it, and then here's your diploma, Campbell. Congratulations.
Yeah,
that's all you need.
We got one from the umbrella school that we were under.
Yeah, and they spelled her name wrong the first time, so we had to get another one.
Awesome. Well, I told myself I have this replica sword at home, and I'm like, Joshua, when you're finished with the things that we've agreed on for you to graduate, I will knight you.
Yes.
Yeah.
We will dub you.
Graduated. Yeah.
Yes.
Congratulations. Here's some confetti.
Yes.
So
it's not that hard.
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, you have the control over it. It can say whatever you want on it.
Yeah. I also did not want a traditional graduation. I could have walked with my umbrella school class, but I didn't know any of those people.
Like, and we also literally have never been to the building where they facility.
Yeah.
Like we just use their software.
If we're going to be completely honest, I don't think that there is anything more painful and boring on the planet
than a
graduation ceremony.
I agree.
Period. The end.
I agree.
Amen.
Yeah. And I also, I didn't want a graduation party either. So I had a senior piano recital instead.
Which is awesome.
Yeah.
We had what we called her last supper before we took her to.
Oh yeah, I saw that.
Because that's 900 miles away, and I was like, "Oh, my baby's leaving."
That came up in my memories the other day on Facebook.
So we just had a dinner at the grandparents' house.
I love that, which is so like to me that's more beautiful. I went to so many grad parties this in May and June, and I was like, I just want to poke my eyes out because I feel like, what did you actually accomplish? Like you checked a bunch of people's boxes,
right?
And now I'm supposed to give you money.
Everybody graduates from high school, like
right? Yeah, and 19% of people who graduate can't read.
Yeah,
so there's that piece.
Right?
Like what are we celebrating exactly? Yay, yeehaw! You did your time. You got paroled. Congratulations.
That's exactly what it is. You did your time. Oh my god.
So I want to thank Liza and Campbell for coming on today. It's been such a delight and such a wonderful pleasure. I'm going to include everything that we've talked about in the show notes, everything from the Common App to BARD and Bookshare and Brave Writer, which Julie Bogart was on back in January on the podcast.
Cool.
So thank you, Liza and Campbell. Last quick thoughts before we go.
Do you have anything?
I think just especially if you're a student, like I said earlier, just, dedicate yourself to your schoolwork, but also just do the things you enjoy doing,
I love it.
and don't worry so much about meeting requirements, especially with extracurriculars and things like that, because if you're really doing things you enjoy and that mean something to you, that'll show through. And also,
Yeah.
when you're actually applying, don't be discouraged if and when you get rejected, because there's, like, for elite schools, you probably will be rejected by several, and I was. For state schools and things, I don't think that's not as much of an issue. So if that's your goal, that's fine. But with a lot of elite schools, it's kind of a lottery, and so you'll end up at the place where you're supposed to be. And
I love
we
that.
we had faith that was what
Yeah.
was going to happen the whole time. So don't let it hurt you when you're rejected.
I love it. I love it. Well, with that, my friends, you've got this. Mamas and papas, grandmas and grandpas, you've got this. Thank you again, Liza and Campbell, and we'll talk next week.